Fantastic April 16th, day 1,200 of the quarantine. Feels like it. But we are here together and glad to have you here. Sound check, Kimberly and Louise, you're hearing me fine?
I sure can.
Okay, very good. Welcome. So, welcome everybody. Let's just take you through a quick couple of introductions here. First of all, welcome. My name is Scott Hamilton. I'm CEO of Executive Next Practice Institute, the producer of these programs, as well as a lot of other things that we offer to our communities across the globe. I'm also director of Nextwork Strategy, which is also co-located with the Institute at the University of California, Irvine, Beal Applied Innovation. That's our home. And again, welcome. Welcome to our 11th year. By the way, this is kind of a back to the future for us. We started with webinars well over 15 years ago and then became a live organization. So this current state is kind of a back to the future. Here's who we are across the globe. We have members and guests from the C-suite of enterprise level companies, normally companies that are north of 5 million in revenue or more. They go up to 20 billion in revenue. All industry sectors are represented in our membership and on these sessions. We bring in enterprise leaders and they participate in these meetings as well as our live meetings to look at new innovation, investment, and growth strategies. And again, it manifests itself in these kind of workshops, these kind of sessions, both on a national, international basis, and also the workshops we do. So this is what it looks like for us. I'll put all this up at once. Almost 60,000 attendees over the past 11 years, 300 plus sessions that we've had. We first look at emerging trends. So when you come to E&P, you're going to be seeing one step ahead of what's happening in the marketplace. For example, 5 years ago, we looked at blockchain. Before that many people knew what blockchain was. You can also expect on these sessions and eventually when we go back to the live sessions, connection with key enterprise leaders, director level and above across all industry sectors. That's who's on the phone today. And that's who you'll meet as a course of being part of us. Our objective today is form next practices for you back at your office, or in this case, in your virtual offices, and in terms of how you can be more efficient, produce a greater value proposition, and allow yourself to partner with other organizations. Just a quick update on what's coming up. Next Friday on the 24th, we have the very popular Advanced LinkedIn Strategy Series led by Henry DeVries, Devin DeVries, and Rhonda Shear. This is a tremendous session. I think this is now gathered north of 200 people, close to 300 people coming in for this one. Mark your calendars, register as you see there for the Advanced LinkedIn Strategy session. Also, we have started something called Coffee with Next Practice Innovators. We had one of these on Tuesday with Rita McGrath of Seeing Around Corners. She's a noted Columbia Business School professor, best-selling author. We had a fantastic discussion with Rita. You'll see more of these coming up. 28th will be with Tom Rieger, author of The Fear Factor and a new book. Mark Bowdy, Margie Worrell, who many of you probably know is a world-renowned organization development expert. So today, it brings us to today's session. We're just delighted to have this one. We've been looking forward to this. There's been such a demand for this review of how to make our remote teams more effective, how to make them more productive and engaged. We've got the technology, right? For most of us, the technology is working. It's VPN, it's Zoom, it's Microsoft Teams, it's Google. But we may have the technology figured out, but we haven't figured out how to make people productive. So that's what this session is about. By the way, before I forget it, join our next sessions here coming up by just going to our E&P Institute link. If you just Google the word Executive Next Practices, you'll see us listed several thousand times. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Again, no cost there. That will show you archived videos of these sessions as well as the interviews with these Next Practice Global Innovators. And then finally, join as a member. This membership is going to extend well into next year if you join now. It covers all sessions, both online as well as our upcoming live events. Okay, with that, let's get to our two experts this morning. We've got Louise Keefe. She's one of our Executive Next Practice Institute advisors. She's owner and principal consultant of Perspectives. She's a tremendous resource in terms of coaching, leadership development, inclusion, diversity, change management, just a host of solutions for enterprise businesses. She's been 20 years with the global Fortune 500 and guided business leaders around the world in how to lead remotely and geographically dispersed teams. She's got her MS and OD from Pepperdine and certificates in a variety of things designed to support this kind of remote team environment. You see some of her recent articles there. So please, with both of these speakers, reach out to them after the session. Following this session, you will get a direct email from us with their emails on how you can connect and engage with Louise and Kimberly. So let's move to Kimberly. Kimberly is also one of our Executive Next Practice Institute advisors. These folks are super connectors, by the way. That's why they're part of our group. They ensure we're bringing the best and brightest content to you and connect you with those enterprise leaders. Kimberly is owner and principal consultant for KCC, and she advises coaches and leaders at all levels by leading through connection. She's had over 20 years experience as a top sales executive for Fortune 100 companies like GE, Genpact, Optum, Boston Scientific, to name a few. She's had great success in working with broken cultures by bringing and building connections between leaders and employees. She believes in this idea of educating leaders is not just enough. You've got to coach each leader individually to their own strengths and weaknesses. She's got an MBA from John Carroll University and also pursued a PhD at Pepperdine, my alma mater as well. Welcome, Kimberly. Again, you will get a post-session email from us about this session, where you can contact both these terrific speakers and how you can get engaged with the Executive Next Practice Forum. So with that, I'm going to turn this over now to Louise and to start us off. Again, welcome, Louise and Kimberly.
Thank you, Scott. So well, welcome everyone, and looking forward to spending the next few minutes with you. I think all of us have been talking about how COVID is just rocking all of our worlds, from school-aged children learning virtually now, to grandparents on lockdown and not being able to see their grandchildren, to everyone in between. And for those of us that are in a workplace, it's really about how do we pivot quickly so we can continue to get work done and be effective. And so today, Kimberly and I are going to share some strategies and tips for navigating this new virtual world. So most likely, many of you are working from home, perhaps from a home office, perhaps from your kitchen table, or maybe in your closet, right, where you're trying to find some quiet space. So we're going to give you some tips and ideas of how to best navigate that and really keep your team engaged, really connect with your employees, and really think about not just today, but in the future. So one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is, as leaders, how we manage this and how we engage our team matters not just right now, which is certainly important right now, but really for the long term. So if we handle this situation well and we really connect with our teams and support our teams now, the engagement level is going to be much better afterwards. If we don't handle it well, once things turn around and the economy comes back, the likelihood of us retaining that talent is probably going to be a lot less likely. So today, the things that we're going to talk about certainly are important as we navigate this unprecedented waters, but also be thinking beyond this pandemic and how you're going to engage and retain your talent then. So what we will do is I will start off talking about how to engage your team as a whole, and then I'll pass it on to Kimberly, who's going to talk about how to really connect with your employees one-on-one, and also think about, how do you kind of manage your own and your team's kind of mental health and well-being to be most effective during this stressful time. So with that, let me share with you 6 C's for connecting your team with your team virtually. So connection, communication, certainty, collaboration, care, and then celebration. So let's start with connection. And Scott mentioned, you know, a lot of us are connected now virtually, whether we're using Zoom or WebEx. So we've got to leverage the technology. Maybe you were doing it before, but now it's kind of up the game, right? We have to connect virtually. And so one of the things I'm encouraging people to do is to use the video cams. And I know people are resistant to that. And, you know, I think that we need to use it smart. So we don't need to have every meeting with Zoom with video, but at least on a weekly basis, connecting with our team, because it really just having that social connection is important. People keep talking about social distancing. You know, I prefer the term physical distancing because I think we need to stay socially connected even during this crazy time. Also, the importance of recognizing the new work environment. People are in very different situations. You probably have some employees that are by themselves, and so they feel socially isolated and their house is quiet. And then you have the other extreme where someone really is just trying to find a quiet space where they can do a phone call. You know, maybe they have several children, you know, their significant others in the house. I know my house has gotten increasingly more busy. I worked from home for the last almost 10 years. And I had my routine, but now there's, you know, a 10-year-old doing schoolwork and having Zoom calls for school, and my husband's working from home. So things have gotten different. So really recognizing where people are and helping them be most effective in that space. Be patient with yourself and your coworkers. I know a month ago, if I was meeting with a client and my child came in, I would be horrified, or my dog barked. Now it's kind of the norm. In fact, I love the fact that people are starting to embrace that, right? We're seeing into people's lives more in a more significant way than we ever have. I mean, most of you probably have seen maybe someone's child, their pet during a call. So I think it's actually one of the benefits of us going through this is to be able to connect with people in a much more meaningful way and to see into their lives in an interesting and new way. Now, that being said, you know, I am hearing from people that they are exhausted from too many video calls. So I'm calling it Zoom nausea, right? So be intentional about when you're going to have those calls that require video and when you're not, right? So if you're connecting with your team and you want to engage people and see how they're doing, definitely use video. If you're doing budget reviews or you're kind of going through some tedious materials or a project plan, video probably isn't necessary. So be strategic on when you use the webcams and allow people to know ahead of time, is this a video meeting or not? I know for me, I'm putting on the makeup if it's a video call, and if I'm not, it's probably one of those days where I'm not putting makeup on. Create an agenda, let people know what's going to happen. Use the chat feature. I mean, one of the real benefits of virtual meetings is you can source ideas much more efficiently. So imagine, right, you're in your office, you know, 4 weeks ago, and you're discussing the idea and you want to hear from your team, you know, you have to kind of let every person talk. Well, if you push a question to the chat and say, you know what, let's just kind of think through this and throw out our ideas on chat, it's actually more efficient, right? So you can make your meetings maybe a little bit faster by leveraging some of these tools like chat. The point on consensus times for meetings, because people are managing things much different than before, you know, maybe they did, you know, come into the office at 7 and leave at 5. Well, but now maybe they have to, you know, be there, the teacher for a few hours during the day. So maybe that means they need to work early and work in the evenings, and in between they have to spend time with doing the education of their children. So chat with people about what's going to work for them from a scheduling standpoint. As far as virtual connections, I feel like it's really important that you're checking in with your team on a weekly basis, and I'll show you in just a minute some of the kind of a sample schedule, but really getting all the voices in the room. And it can be as simple as, you know, what's most challenging right now for you, what's something good that's coming out of that, or like I said, you can use a chat. Put one word in the chat to identify how you're feeling today. just to see how your team's doing and connect with them. And remember, each person's situation is different. I'm encouraging people to say, let's just do the best that we can. Maybe we're not doing our, ultimate work, right? Because things are a little bit chaotic. Maybe there's a lot of stress and, again, a lot of distractions. Encourage people to do the best that they can and pay attention to your team about how they are handling the stress. Some people I talk to, they sound like they're doing very, very well with it, and other people are really struggling. So we need to really pay attention to that for our team. Communication, communication, communication. And I think Kimberly talks a lot about this as well, but being transparent with your team, sharing what you know. People recognize that things are happening and changing every single day, right? But share what you know now. Let them know that you'll give them updates, whether it's weekly or daily, whatever works for your team. Get into a rhythm of regular communication. Share personal stories. As a leader, I think it's so powerful when we're transparent about maybe some of the challenges that we're facing, so other people recognize that they're not the only one. And discuss new working norms. I mean, things have changed a lot, right? For many organizations, they didn't have anyone working from home, and now they may have everyone working from home. So what does that look like for the team? So I think having an open dialogue where people can talk about, what are the new expectations as we work from home? What are the expectations for video, flexibility for work schedules? How are we going to communicate? You can't have people plugged in 24/7 checking their email because they're going to get burned out. There's already a lot of stress on people. So you may say, for communication after 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, if it's important, just pick up the phone and call me or text me because I'm not going to be checking my email. Whatever that is, but have that open communication about what these new norms are. Talk about new ways of collaborating. Can you leverage technology like Teams? I know a lot of organizations have Office 365, but they haven't used Teams. So maybe now is the time to try it. Try things that are going to pull people together for that collaboration. And then finally, another thing that I know people are challenged with is finding those work-life boundaries. Even people that regularly work from home find it challenging to have those boundaries. But now, again, with the added stress, establishing those boundaries can be really critical for people's effectiveness. I think sometimes we think if we work more, it's going to be better, but really if we have that downtime, it's going to actually make us more efficient and more effective in the long haul. So the next thing I want to talk about is just about creating certainty. And our brain is wired for patterns and consistency and certainty. And Kimberly's going to talk a little bit about the brain science behind all this. But creating that certainty in a time where things are so uncertain is so critical. I think the number one question I hear from people, or their desire to have, is, when is this going to be over? When can I get back to some semblance of normal? And the reality is none of us have the answer. So the more certainty you can create amongst your team, it's going to help them be more settled and less stressed. And so let me give you an example. Creating a new cadence, whether it's meetings or how you're going to connect with your team, refocus the team, even discussing shifting priorities. Things that were important a month ago likely aren't the same things that are important today. So what are those things? Getting people laser focused on what's important now is going to help them kind of get through this time. And again, create as much certainty as possible. Now, I throw this out as an example, not to be prescriptive, but to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. One area of certainty you can give people is sort of a rhythm of how you're going to connect for the week. So perhaps Monday it is a check-in and kind of talking about priorities, doing that check-in, that individual check-in to see how people are doing, how was their weekend, that type of thing. What did we learn from last week? There is a lot of learning going on. And my fear is people are going to buzz through it and miss some great learning opportunities. So having your team pause and think about, what did we learn? How can we apply this now, but even in the future after this pandemic is over? Talk about commitments, how we can help each other, and even talk about how we can experiment and innovate for our customers. So maybe Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, you're kind of checking in with the team. You are using video, that midweek check-in just to see how people are doing. And then Fridays, connecting and having fun. I would encourage people to celebrate big and small wins. I think even without the pandemic, a lot of organizations are not good at celebrating. And so taking that time right now just to have some fun, celebrate, whether it's birthdays, milestones, or other good things that are happening, is a great way to start. And you can even include kids on that Friday call, maybe. Maybe Tuesdays and Thursdays are no video days. Some organizations, their schedules have slowed down. So take this time to use that to have people maybe focus on learning something new. Maybe Thursday is Thoughtful Thursday to encourage people to give back to the community. Again, this is just a sample to say, get some type of rhythm for your team so they can be focused, have some fun, and use this time as a unique time in their career to connect with each other. Kimberly's going to talk a lot about one-on-ones, but we do encourage having at least a one-on-one on a weekly basis during this time. The next, and we're almost done with our C's, so the next is collaboration. Creating a sense of teamwork where people are working together on something helps them, again, adjust to the stress. So also encourage rapid decision-making. Make it okay to make mistakes. We're not going to always get it right, but things are moving so quickly. If we do the analysis we used to, well, we may miss some opportunities. So encourage that collaboration, teamwork, working together, and rapid decision-making. Take the time to ask some questions. How can we help our clients in new ways? How can we use the virtual tools more effectively? What are we learning from this? So lots of opportunities for collaboration. And one of our last C's is taking care. You've got to take care of yourself to be able to take care of your team. And I won't go into a lot of details on self-care because Kimberly's going to talk about that in just a minute. But if you're not taking that time, then you're probably not as effective for your team. And your team is really checking in on them, see how they're doing, checking on them as an individual. We always say, how are you doing? But now it's more like, how are you really doing? And really try to understand where people are. You can imagine after this is over, for those leaders that take the time to really care about their employees and check in on them, it's going to have a lasting impact. And then finally, that will also help with your organization care, making sure your team is focused on the right things. And then our final C is celebration and fun. I mentioned that in the schedule. Really taking some time to celebrate big and small wins and some fun things. So virtual coffee breaks, perhaps have a meeting where you bring your son or daughter to it, pet-friendly meetings, use fun virtual backgrounds, maybe even a 6-foot distance photo contest. Whatever it is to bring some, just a little bit of fun to the workplace to help people get through this stressful time. So with that, I'm going to pause. Scott, do we have any questions that we want to pause and ask before we pass it over to Kimberly? Are there any questions out there? We can't hear you, Scott.
I'm muted. A couple of people are coming in late. I had a couple of quick questions. Will they get a copy of this? Yes, this will be posted on ENP TV, our YouTube channel, following this, and you'll get a link on how to access the entire presentation, as well as how to connect with our speakers. Other questions at this point? Please feel free to use your chat, or more appropriately, the Q&A feature that's on the bottom of your screen as we go through this. Thank you for the feedback. Some folks are telling us it's a great roadmap. By the way, thank you for the schedule there, Luis. The schedule is very helpful. For those that are following along, we have our video days for training where you can access this on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So perhaps your team is, perhaps your team is busy on other things. You can do your training with us on Tuesdays and Thursdays. All right, great. Thank you so much. Kimberly, let's go to you. Welcome.
Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you, Scott. And next slide, please, Louise. Great. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the individual one-on-ones as a leader. I know Louise kind of focused on the entire team, but one of our important roles as a leader is to build trust with our employees. And how do you do that? So it's through consistent interaction and an investment of time. And ironically, with this time of this higher anxiety that all of us are seeming to feel with COVID-19, when you actually spend more time with your employees one-on-one and build that trust, you're also delivering the oxytocin hormone, which is the trust hormone, which actually blocks cortisol, which is stress. So it's kind of it's like a double win here. When you're trying to spend more time with your team while we have some extra time, you're doing something for the long run when we get out of this COVID-19 to ensure you have a team for unity and a team that's ready to jumpstart when we get out of this post-COVID-19. Next slide. So when I coach clients, I really stress to them that it's not that annual employment or employee review that they fill out that determines whether you're good as a leader or not. When they're evaluating you or they're evaluating their happiness at work, what they're actually doing is they're aggregating all those interactions and connections you had over the course of the year that were day-to-day interactions. So how often were you chatting with them? How often did you ask if you cared about them, or how can I help, or how can I best support you? So your day-to-day interactions, and this is where I'm passionate about making them connections, will determine your employees' overall satisfaction, happiness at work, and your skills as a leader, and importantly, whether they're gonna stay or they're gonna go. So practicing connected leadership is really imperative now, so your employees are retained when we get post-COVID-19. Next slide. The important one-on-one is very important. And oftentimes when I'm working with clients, I really encourage them not to cancel these. We all get busy, right? We've got a board meeting, we've got a product deadline, we've got a project deadline, we're working on our financials, whatever. Really try to keep this as a sacred moment because it does so good. It's such a good investment on your part as a leader for your employees. It builds engagement, it reduces burnout, better retention, and increased productivity. Next slide. So it contains 4 key components. I focused on these 4 right now because of COVID-19 and because of the anxiety levels. We can talk later at another opportunity when we're post this about where to also focus on some personal development and collaboration. But right now, the most important 4 key components are constructive feedback that is not micromanaging, but for example, Sally, I was really impressed with the way you gave that presentation overview for that client. But what do you think if we also considered polling the client and asking some questions to get their feedback, right? So not really overly on the bad, a lot of positives in there and more or less collaborative suggestions. One thing that you can be doing now that I think will make a huge impact on your connection with your team and your individuals and building trust for them is the recognition piece. Luis mentioned it a little bit too, but it doesn't have to just be on completing a project or completing a sale. Recognition can be about somebody's effort or how hard they're working or the time that they spend or the conversations they're having, right? Recognition is so important. Gallup shows that 40% of employees will say when you give them regular, consistent, positive feedback, they will want to do their job better. They'll want to work harder. And this is a time to build your team up, to unite them, to get them passionate about their job and about you. So when post-COVID-19, you're jump-starting, right? Luis also mentioned this too. It's really important to not just be about business. We are human beings. We have our own anxieties as leaders. We are now seeing into the homes of people, their families, their kids, their dogs. Be there as a human being, not just as a leader. So please get to know your team, okay? The 4th part is really asking, how can I help? I think sometimes too, if you've not had these great relationships with your employees, it's hard for them to feel like they can come forward to you and ask for your help. So really offer it, be generous in that. How can I help you? Are you struggling with anything? Are you finding the distractions at home hard to manage? Do you need some guidance on that? Are you having trouble navigating the technology? Whatever it is, be there as a coach, a mentor, and a support system. Next slide. I love this one. It's a time where we don't know what normal is, right? So why don't we be a little creative, right? I'm encouraging my clients and leaders to just send a note in the mail to each of their employees with a note that says, let's connect over coffee. Set a date, set a time, right? And then instead of sitting in your office with, your office in the back or whatever bookshelf, create maybe a virtual coffee shop in Italy or something like that, or go to your living room. But in my book called Connections Change Everything, I devote an entire chapter to the lost meal. Why? Because think about it. If you met with somebody in their office, what happens? You restrict that conversation specifically to business, right? Or the project at hand or the issue at hand. But when you go and meet somebody for coffee, what happens? The conversation opens up to a huge degree. People become more vulnerable, more relatable. You as a leader become more relatable and vulnerable, and so does your employee. So try to create the best you can, a virtual coffee experience that opens up that relationship and builds that trust, right? Next slide. What are the successes out of this? What do you get at as far as investing that time consistently with your team? If you're doing regular one-on-ones and you're doing it at a minimum of twice a month in a normal setting, your burnout is reduced by 84%. Louise kind of mentioned this too in her last slide. I really feel now you need to be doing these one-on-ones every single week. I mentioned too, when you're providing in these one-on-ones some constructive feedback and positive feedback, your employees are going to want to do a better job, right? Studies also show when you as a leader are not engaging and not spending time with your employees, 57% of them will leave for a like job, like company like benefits, and no other reason than the fact that they didn't feel valued and have a trusting relationship with their leader. And then, of course, it increases productivity by 30%. Next slide. Okay, now, how is COVID-19 affecting all of us? I don't know about you, but in talking with friends, colleagues, family, clients, we all have this little underlying level of anxiety, right? And Louise touched on it. It stems from our lack of control, not knowing what's going to happen in the future from an economic perspective. You know, people are worried about their job, being furloughed or having to furlough people. There's an uncertainty about, is this ever going to go away? Are we going to ever find a cure? But in this particular time, it's unprecedented in the aspect that we do not have connectedness. We are separated, because typically when you look at crises, we always can come together in a community. We can have a candlelight vigil. We can have a church service. We can give hugs. And the fact that we today cannot have that connectedness is adding to the level of anxiety that we're all feeling. And I really want to share this slide and this message because it's important to you as a leader now, not only understanding why you're having all these feelings and what's limiting you and your day-to-day productivity, but being able to also relate that to your team and your individual employees and being sensitive to that. Next slide. I love David Rock, and he is coined the phrase neuro leadership, and he is the principal and founder of the Neuro Leadership Institute. And if you have not been able or I highly encourage, if you're fascinated by psychology, listen to his YouTube interview on psychological impacts of COVID-19. And he says that the coronavirus and this pandemic mirrors the physical threat. And when you're thinking of a physical threat, it's got 3 levels. So imagine that the coronavirus or this pandemic is a lion. So level 1 is the lion's out there. We've heard that somebody's been killed by the lion. We don't know anybody. We've not seen it. We've just heard about it on the news, right? The second level is the lion's in your neighborhood. You now know somebody, you know a neighbor, a friend, somebody, you heard of somebody who was attacked and eaten by the lion, right? And you also have a fear that if you went outside, you could get eaten by the lion. The third level is the lion's knocking on your door. He's coming in, or you've already opened the door and he's in your house. So you're really at the top of fear and fight or flight, right? Hopefully, most of us are between level 1 and 2. And what does that mean from a physicality and a psychological perspective? When you're between 1 and 2, you have that little level of anxiety. You might be finding you're having a hard time really trying to focus on tasks that require a lot of thought. You know, I thought it would be kind of interesting to be able to start writing my second book, but I'm finding I'm handicapped in doing that. It's your creative juices, your ability to use that part of your brain and a lot of strategy. The closer you get to over level 2, the less opportunity you have to be able to capture that use of your brain. And you're more on just focused tasks. You'll be able to schedule a lot of Zoom calls, but really not much else than that. When you're between level 2 and level 3, what also happens is your digestive system starts to get compromised. So you'll probably have a little more nausea, difficulty breathing and sleeping. And then 2, when you're getting closer to that level 3, your immune system goes down. And that's why it's so important right now with this pandemic to keep yourself more close to level 1. And I'll share with some of you some best practices around that. Next slide. Okay, checking on time here. Okay, great. So we want to try to create certainty and control and connection in relationship to reducing that anxiety. And Louise touched on a couple of these things, so I'm not going to spend a great deal of time, and we can use this for Q&A. But best thing you can do is change what part of your brain you're using. Instead of using where it's fear-based brain thinking, you want to start using the frontal part of your brain, which is more about certainty. How do you do that? You create a vision, and you can do this for your family. It's not just about you as a leader, but it's you as a leader, you as your team, and you as your significant others, right? Create a vision about where would you like to be at the end of this SIP? Would you like to have a book done? Would you like to better know your colleagues or your employees by having those coffee 101 sessions? Would you like to be able to understand your clients better and have those kind of coffee conversations? Whatever it is, create a vision and monitor your progress through that, because keeping your purpose and resolve front and center helps to reduce that level of uncertainty and anxiety. Next slide. Control, I'm German, love control. So this is my issue, especially now, but you know, I really encourage my clients in coaching them during this time is try to control what you can control. We can't control, unfortunately, whether we're going to get a vaccine or not. And really, unfortunately, the impact a lot of the small businesses closing has on some people losing their jobs. It's just really a sad time for a lot of us and seeing what's happening to other people. So, you know, we can't, I try to help people to, when you recognize an emotion, whatever it is, feel that emotion, but then I also say, just put it in a box and close the lid. You know, allow that emotion to flow through. You don't want to deny it, but allow it, put it in a box and close it and try to focus at your task at hand. I remember one person said to me, worry is just experiencing your failures in advance. So worry serves us no purpose whatsoever. So try to just, you know, focus on some gratitude and some positive things. I know some of us here might not be as spiritual. It's a great time to possibly look into some meditation, but I'll talk about that in a little bit more. Media, oh my gosh, is there not enough media out there? In the Wall Street Journal article I read was on the science of connectedness. And it talks about that we are receiving 11 million pieces of information per second. As a human being, we can only process 50 pieces of information per second. So we're on overload, right? And imagine if you've got the news on constantly, you're getting all that negative feedback, which is not very good from an anxiety management and your mindset management. Try to limit your media exposure. And again, when you're feeling something that's negative, try to counteract it with something that's positive, that's going around out of this event, whether it's connections with your family, learning a new skill, connecting with your team, etc. So the secret to handling change and uncertainty is to focus on progress. And that can even be daily progress. Just keep moving forward in your structure, in your tasks, your goals, and objectives. Next slide. All right, so in my book, I have a whole chapter dedicated to the power of digital technology. It's positive and it's also negative, okay? We're thankful right now we have digital technology between webinars, Zooms, WebEx, etc. But as a leader and as a human being, really be conscious about how you're using technology. If you have an opportunity to pick up the phone and call somebody and have a one-on-one conversation, that is much more powerful, much more emotionally engaging than doing a text or an email. Text and email is absent of emotion. It's just irrational exchange. Pick up the phone and call somebody. And when you're feeling down, pick up the phone and call somebody. That one-on-one connection over voice is just will do wonders for boosting your morale and boosting their morale. Next slide. The reason too I selected that baby picture is because in that same Wall Street Journal article and talking about Zoom and video chats and WebEx, they did a study. Because a lot of people I think feel that if they're on a Zoom in WebEx, it's just as good as being in person. And interesting enough, they had babies that were watching their significant other, a parent, I said guardian or whatever, a parent, teaching them a language. And when it was done in person, after 4 weeks, the baby learned the language. They mimic the same event, however, having the parent or guardian doing it over Zoom, webinar, whatever, baby learned nothing, absolutely nothing. And it's because when we're in person, we get an energy exchange and we have verbal nods. We have a lot deeper eye contact. We have the hums and ahs and all that kind of stuff that go on, which are kind of muffled when we're on a video chat. So what I like to focus people on when you are, in order to get the most out of that virtual communication is, my camera's at the bottom of my screen, unfortunately. So when I'm trying to look at you, I'm actually looking like I'm not looking at you. So if I look down at the camera, it's probably more personable, but also really try to be conscious of your nodding, your asking questions. That's why chat's such a good application. Raising your hand, such a good application, because then it pulls you in as opposed to just being a passive user of the technology, and vice versa as a leader. So be present, don't be multitasking. Eye contact is really vital. If you can just at least stay in contact with one other person on that Zoom webinar or the leader, that eye contact is validation of somebody's value and worth. It's the reason why when we first get that acceptance as a child, when we get the first gaze from our parents, right? And that active engagement is the conversations of just, can you explain that further? I didn't quite understand that, or I'd like to ask a question. So that helps to build as best we can with the technology we have, thank goodness we do, to create some kind of the connection that we're all missing in our life. Next slide. Okay. Steps for your sanity and leadership. This is not the time to be getting to burnout. This is not the time to be pushing yourself. Your immune system will decline. It'll affect your loved ones. It'll affect your performance. So it's, Luis touched on this too. It's about balance. You think we're working 8 to 9 to 10 hours when you're in the office, but there's a lot of downtime that occurs through that, maybe 2 to 3 hours, depending. So you sitting at your desk for 8 to 10, whatever it is not necessarily comparable to being in the office. So allow yourself some breaks, right? Use a different part of your brain. Turn that fear into challenges by creating goals, objectives, and structure. Then from a deep breathing, a lot of people don't realize this. When you are stressed, you're anxious, what do? You hold your breath. Be conscious of that and take a deep breath. And that'll do wonders for just adding a sense of peace, adding a sense of clarity, and then adding just a sense of control, which we're all seeking at this point. I've already talked about media and uncertainty, so we'll go to the next slide. Impact on your business. And Luis talked about this in the very beginning, and we both feel passionate about this. This is the time as a leader to, if you're not practicing connected leadership, it's a time to make up for it, if you will. You've got extra time. And by spending the time and getting to know your people, strengthening your team, you will be ahead of the game of those people that are not. Why? Because just like I think it's going to happen in marriages and relationships, if you haven't been able to get through this together and been supportive of each other, you're going to separate. I think employers are going to do the same. If they don't feel valued, if they don't feel supported during this time, and that you're sensitive to their needs during this crisis, they're going to want to be out of here too. And you don't want to be practicing the game of hiring new talent when this is over. You want to be able to jumpstart and get going. And it's proven that when you have an engaged team, your company drives 2.5 to 3 times the revenue than those that don't. Next slide. Okay, the moment you've been waiting for. So I want to, on behalf of Luis and myself, I want to thank Scott and Executive Next Practices for allowing us to have a platform to share how passionate we are, Luis and I, about connected leadership during this time and protecting your relationships, and more importantly, making you successful in the future. Please feel free to connect with each one of us on LinkedIn. As Scott mentioned in the beginning, Luis has some great articles on her website, perspectives.com. that you might find fascinating on connecting your teams virtually learning, etc. Same thing for myself on my website, KimberlyLane.com. I've got a lot of video blogs and a lot of podcast interviews as of late that I've done. And then of course, I've got my book that just launched in February called Connections Change Everything, now available on Amazon. So with that being said, I will open up the floor. Scott, is that okay for questions
Terrific.
for Luis and I?
Yeah, let's
so
open
it
up
looks
to
like
questions,
we
and I've
have-
got a couple of questions now. Yeah, and I'm going to just bring us all onto screen here. We've got a question that comes up. We were talking about schedules, and the question is, what are some other schedules that work in terms of this zooming pattern that work with more than one time zone? So we have a lot of folks that run global companies on the
Sure.
call today. How do you schedule around globally based workforces?
Sure. I'm happy to tackle that one. I know I worked at Eaton for a long time, so I was tackling people in Europe, people in Asia, and I sit in Southern California. So it's always a challenge, even without the pandemic. But the time, particularly for the US and Europe, is usually in the mornings. But I'm also sensitive to early mornings video, right? So a 5 a.m. call for me, and I have to have makeup on and be awake at 5 a.m. is challenging. So if you can make them later, usually for Europe, the 7, 8 a.m. time still works for Europe and California. Again, I know people are kind of spread across the globe. For some that are working from Southern California and Asia, nighttime works. I like the late in the evening. So really, I think it's kind of the same, but I would be sensitive on the videos if someone is calling in for at a really early time or really super late time. That being said, I just participated in a call this week where we had crazy hair day. So it was with a client, they had their team on and I was on. So that makes it a lot easier. So in the morning, I wake up with pretty crazy hair. So encourage people to have some fun with it as well.
That's a great comment. Again, being sensitive, by the way, this question about timing with dealing with our global coworkers, this has come up many, many years before, whether you talk about voice calls or other kind of networking. And it seemed to be, I remember when I was with Nestle and we had a global workforce, we would invariably try to schedule our Asia Pac people where it'd be 3 o'clock in the morning for them or vice versa. So again, it's this whole sensitivity about looking at the entire global map, mix it up, move the meetings around, be sensitive to what people are available to do. Another question here. What are some of the common ideas you've heard for virtual connections amongst coworkers? Common ideas for virtual connections among coworkers, such as virtual happy hours. And as you know, we have a standing Friday afternoon E&P Advisor happy hour. It's called the Howard Hughes Happy Hour, where we get together and share notes about what's going on in the market. So what other kind of techniques do you recommend here?
I'll go ahead and start.
All right.
So,
Go ahead, come on.
So a lot of times we think as a leader, we have to initiate everything and we have to be the one creating that virtual event. I think what I really tried to with clients right now is encouraging individual team members to reach out to each other and rotate around the organization about who they have these virtual coffees with. So not only is it a time for a leader to better get to know his employees, but it's a time for colleagues to better get to know other colleagues and make it so that it's another department. Maybe it's operations and sales. Maybe it's marketing and finance, right? But it just is an opportunity to really build connection and be creative on those virtual coffees or virtual happy hours, or, maybe it's even a conversation where it's not even about business. It's about a 20-minute, let's get to know you and bring in your best COVID-19 joke, right? I'm big on humor. So that's what I'm finding it's taking advantage of this time to make it a little more fun, a little more connecting, and to walk away with, maybe a positive experience out of this and how we get to know each other.
Yeah, that's a great
So one of the
comment.
things
Please.
Sorry, Scott. So I think, the happy hour has gotten really popular. In fact, I've joked that I've been to more virtual happy hours in the last couple of weeks than I have been to real happy hours in the last 5 years combined. But people are connecting, which is great, which also shows you how people are craving that connection, even for those introverts out there, right? Still craving that connection. That being said, I've also heard from people that it's like, it's getting to a point where it's almost too much. So having a good balance. I mentioned birthdays. I actually coordinated a surprise birthday party for a friend of mine where I coordinated with her husband and her kids. And we were all our friends were online. And then her daughter said, oh, you know, Mom, I'm having trouble with my homework. Can you come help me? And her mom came to the computer and surprise, we're all there. So you can get really creative. I love some of the virtual backgrounds that you can do with Zoom, and I think Teams has it. I think WebEx does not, but some of the platforms allow you to do virtual backgrounds, right? So, you know, wherever you are, having people share a virtual background. I mean, I could take you to Disneyland right now and hang out with you all. Yeah. So just to make it a little bit fun. But I've encouraged people to put like maybe their favorite vacation background. And so it allows people to say, you know, I remember the day when I was here. I wish I could be there now. So be creative. And to Kimberly's point, you don't, as a leader, you don't have to make up all the ideas. Allow other people to come up with them as well.
Yep, that's a great comment. Also, when you talk, we've talked a lot about teams all morning, but tell me about one-on-ones. What do you recommend in terms, the question from the audience is, what's the appropriate length for a one-on-one with one of your team members? That's leader to subordinate or team member to team member. What's the appropriate length?
So, if you're going from really being not a present leader at all, it might be very intimidating for all of a sudden you to schedule 60 minutes every week over coffee. I mean, that's why I kind of don't encourage having a virtual lunch initially. I mean, it's going to be affronting to that employee. So you want to kind of slowly build that trust. So, you know, it might be, if you haven't really had one-on-ones with somebody, start with 20 minutes and keep it a light conversation. Sincerely ask and inquire about that person as a human being. And maybe you don't even talk about business at the time. It's really about how are you doing during this crisis, right? And it's really about how can I help you, right? And anything you're struggling with. And please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And then, you know, once I think if you're in tune enough and sensitive enough, you'll start seeing that employee probably relax a little bit, that you can probably build it out to 60 minutes. If you're doing it every week, I certainly wouldn't do longer than 60 minutes. You know, typically when we're kind of in the normal work mode, it's usually 60 to 90 minutes, depending on what needs to be covered twice a month. But I really, at this time, you know, keep it, I'd say 45 minutes once a week is plenty, but really be sensitive if you've never had a conversation that intimate with an employee, because they're going to be very affronted if you start off too intense too quick, right? We all would be.
Yeah. And I think even in this time, when a leader reaches out to a person to not even talk about work at all, they just give them a call and say, you know, I just want to check in on it. How are you doing? How's your family doing? What's the kind of biggest struggle, and how can I help with a sincere heart? That is going to go so far. So, you know, I think the calls that you don't even talk about work are actually more powerful right now than the calls that you do. So focus on the people first and help them get through this, and then the work will come.
No, great comment.
To add to that too, just even in team meetings too, it's important not to be so structured. You know, I always like to say, please open up with the elephant in the room. I mean, and address what we all know is going on, right? You know, and just really open up with, anybody want to talk about, you know, what's going on right now with working from home, challenges we're facing, or, you know, how are you feeling about the economy right now? Or, you know, just, you've got to put it on the table. Otherwise people will not be able to focus whatsoever, because you're not addressing the elephant in the room. And again, that builds trust, right? And it builds a place of safety and community, which only strengthens your team and yourself as a leader moving forward.
Yeah, and let's kind of a closing question here. A great question from the audience. Here we are, April 16th. For much of the country, it's been announced that they'll go, quote unquote, back online around May 15th. So we're looking at a minimum of another month for this kind of isolation for many people. And they also are bombarded every day with more negative information, which cycles them right back into shock, grief, you name it. So you've talked a little bit about this, but when we're in isolation and continue to get bombarded, how do we get refocused? How do we get creative? How do we see past it? How do we gain control when we're constantly being recycled, seems like every evening or every morning, back to this state of shock? What do you recommend there?
I really would pick and choose your avenues of where you get your information. I mean, for me, it's to constantly have the news on, it's too much. It's too much. And not having the ability to control it. So, you know, I actually have on I don't have a Google phone. I have an iPhone, I have a Google phone, and I've programmed my news updates in the morning. So I get, whether it's Reuters, CNN, whatever it is, I get updates on what I want to hear about, and that's enough. You know, I've got some friends, we all rotate on who listens to the daily White House briefing, and we trade it off, and someone sends us the summary notes of what we think we're going to want to hear, because we can't process it. As I mentioned, there's 11 million pieces of information that hit us every second, and we can only process 50 of that. And if it's all negative, it's going to just kill us. So I think, you know, I think some of us can tolerate news better than others, find it more fascinating than others, that's fine. But you really have to protect your mental health right now. You really have to protect and feeling an element of control and positivity. So hence why I talked about, you know, if you're listening to something that's negative, listen to it, whatever, turn it off, but then also really be conscious about what's positive about this experience, right? And make a conscious note about it. And maybe go take a walk outside in nature, you know? Maybe it's, gosh, I'm so thankful I'm able to be home with my family for dinner, and we're all finding new recipes. But you've got to counter out the negative with just as much positive. Otherwise, it's going to suck you down, and it's going to affect you not only emotionally, but physically from your immune system. And you'll be constantly tired, depression, et cetera, all those things that happen, right?
Yeah, I think it's interesting in that one of the questions to the panelists was about truly struggling with this situation and isolation. And I think there's several things from the brain science, you know, Kimberly mentioned David Rock and that whole body of work. And so one thing that is recommended is, number one, name it to claim it. Name it to tame it. So if you have something that you know that you're really stressed about, or that it's really causing you that anxiety, what is it? Just name it, and you think that that's going to make it worse. It actually helps you put some parentheses around it to capture it. Secondly, then normalize it. Understand, like, you know, other people are dealing with this too. And then thirdly, what are you going to do to move forward? So thinking about, like, how can I leverage this time right now for good? And I've been challenging leaders everywhere that I'm talking that, you know, this is a really interesting time. For some, it's very chaotic, but for a lot of people, it's a big pause. I've heard it called the great pause. And I think I personally want to look back on this time and say, you know what, this time really was a horrible time, but here was some good that came out of it. This is what I learned. This is how I developed. I focused on something. I mean, I wasn't writing many articles. In the last couple of weeks, I've been writing more articles. Whatever it is for you, I would encourage you to think about, how can I use this time that's very unique in my career and in my life for good? And so that's my last words on that.
I do want to address, because I thought this was really important. Somebody asked a question about dealing with the isolation, the level of anxiety. And so I have some sensitivity to that, because I'm by myself as well. And, you know, it's a good time to start journaling. If you don't do that already, it gets the emotion out of you and onto a page. And you might find after this, you go back and start reading it and might have learned something about yourself and grown. But try to journal. That might help a lot with the anxiety and the isolation. I talked a lot about creating a goal, because it uses a different part of your brain. When you actually say, I have a goal that I want to complete X, Y, Z by the end of the week, or at the end of this process, that every day you're walking against that goal and determining how far along you are on the goal. And I don't care if it's just one step, you're moving forward. And that helps to change the use of part of your brain that is not focused on the fear and the anxiety, but you're focused now on progress. And that is one really good way to minimize that anxiety and build kind of a sense of purpose when you're isolated. And then finally, you know, pick up the phone and start calling some people, some dear friends. It's, for me, I'd rather be on the phone. For me, Zoom, I just feel like I'm giving energy into an inanimate object that can't give it back to me, versus when I'm in person, there's that energy exchange, and it's draining for me. I'd rather pick up the phone and talk one-on-one to somebody. And maybe that might be something you might want to plan a daily call, maybe twice a day with, you know, significant people in your life that you know you'll feel good when
Right.
you're done. And it, you know, they're going to need it just as much as you do. So please schedule that out. I mean, I've got a, not to ramble here, but I have a standing webinar Zoom call with 2 of my girlfriends every day at 1 o'clock, regardless, even if we just chat for 15 minutes. And it's been our sanity check, and we all need it.
That's great. Not great advice. Well, we need to be at an on-time close here. And thanks everybody for your questions. Kimberly, Louise, thanks so much for your comments and input. I want to throw up one thing before everybody exits here, and just as a reminder of how you can take this from here. And give me just a moment here, and I'll show you our contacts if I can get to the right screen. Maybe not. All right, for next steps, again, join us at our next sessions. Here's the links to reach all of our ENP events, including the Next Practice interviews. It's a free subscription to our TV show. You will see this particular show put up on on our ENP TV by the end of the week. So you'll be able to see this again in full. And again, join as an annual member. It covers you well into 2021. That'll include the live events that we continue to have across the globe. Again, thank you all for joining us this morning. Again, thank you, Kimberly. Thank you, Louise. We'll see you next time. See you next week. Take care.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Louise.